easy to get to where you need to be on this fashion journey, whether you go through Goodwill or go through Rodeo Drive. It doesn't really matter. The important part is that you have value and you should be able to dress the way that you want to dress and express who you are.
That was Alicia Searcy. In 2012, at the age of 51, she started Spashionista, what was then the only fashion blog in the Southeast focused on those with disabilities. From there, things have really taken off for her. She's now co-founder and executive director of Nashville nonprofit Fashion is for Everybody. Let's learn more about her drive and the example she sets for others with her efforts to showcase those with disabilities, as they should be positioned, in a positive light as real people living everyday lives.
I'm Sally Hussey, the CEO of 50 Forward, and we elected to launch this podcast because we know older adults have such inspiring stories and wisdom worth sharing. We have now all learned that social connections are critical to our well-being. This podcast is made possible by 50 Forward, the leading resource for adults 50 plus in Middle Tennessee who seek to live longer, more fulfilling lives.
You're listening to Squeeze the Day, where we talk to extraordinary people over the age of 50 who are living their best life now. Their stories of a well-lived life are both inspiring and encouraging to all of us as we seek to navigate a meaningful and purpose-driven second chapter in our life. I'm Susan Sizemore, Communications Director for 50 Forward. So let's get started. Alicia, please share a bit about where you were born and your early life living with cerebral palsy.
First of all, thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here. I was born in New York City, Queens, yay, Queens, in 1961. And in 1961, having CP was much more mysterious a disease than it is these days. It was typically something that people were institutionalized for. So my doctors told my parents that I would probably grow up to be a vegetable. And instead, I grew up to be a ham. So I guess I showed them all. Growing up was actually, for me, a mixed bag of joy and trepidation. I was a very happy kid. I loved being by myself and playing and reading. I was an avid reader. My parents didn't get along very well, so there was some conflict at home. And there were issues that had nothing to do with CP that kind of hindered me as a person growing up. But I will say that I owe my parents the gift of life, of being able to live a normal life. They always mainstreamed me. That was very important to them, and that is a very valuable gift that I have moving forward. At the age of 8, I moved to South Florida, where I stayed for a pretty long time, about 25 years. And then we moved up to Nashville, my husband and I, and we've been here for 27 years, I think. So I've lived in Tennessee longer than I have anywhere else.
You know, we've known each other for a bit, but I really hadn't thought about where your roots were, didn't really think about specifically an accent. But it's so interesting, not only your roots, but how your parents took you different places and mainstreamed and really gave you the opportunity to, in some ways, turn lemons to lemonade throughout your life. That kind of brings me to the next thing that I wanted to talk about. The Nashville flood of 2010 was a tipping point for you in many respects. Will you tell us a bit more about this? I know your house was underwater and you lost all your belongings. Bring us back there a bit. Tell us a bit more about how that moment changed your life.
Yeah, we live out in the country, but we live in a low-lying area. And so we got flooded not when the rains came, but when the dam was opened so that downtown Nashville could be saved. They did that overnight and did not tell us. So we woke up to, our front porch floating level with our front window. We spent like 3 days in our backyard. And when we came back in, obviously a lot of my possessions were destroyed because being someone who is not only walker or wheelchair dependent, but also only 5 feet tall, I don't have a lot of stuff that's up high. So most of my things were down low, and I lost a lot of my possessions, and lots of my shoes upset me greatly. I was actually okay until my husband said, "Your shoes." And I said, "Oh no, oh God, help me, please." When the flood hit, it kind of gave me an opportunity start over, to start over in a better place than I had left. And I think that all trauma in life gives us this opportunity to start things in ways that maybe are more beneficial moving forward. I decided that after having lived for so long as someone who was kind of invisible, who didn't really pay attention to what she was wearing, to what she looked like, who really suffered in interacting with people as a result, because people do look at you differently when you look sloppy, when you look like you don't care, especially if you're in a wheelchair, that they don't really understand that. I decided I would rebuild my wardrobe with intention, and that I would do it wearing things that not only brought me joy, but wearing things that I thought expressed who I was as a person. And of course, that has evolved into pretty much the rest of my life at this point. And this was at age 51. Okay. So, really, if you look at it, my life really didn't start in earnest until I was in my 50s. This is the point at which I said, okay, I'm done hiding. I'm done cowering. I'm done waiting for life to happen. I'm going to happen to life now.
What a beautiful and inspiring story coming out of the floods. And as a woman, I can relate to the shoe loss, but it's so interesting how you really are almost living true to that adage where not necessarily that clothes make the person, but maybe they do help you reposition or frame yourself. So tell us a little bit about what's happening since that point.
Well, in 2012, after kind of finding my footing, I decided just on a lark to Google the term disabled fashion blogger. And I got absolutely nothing in return. I Googled, I binged, I did several different search engines. There was nothing. So I said, okay, it's time for me to become either the first or the first on the radar disabled fashion blogger. So I started a blog called Spashionista, which is short for spastic fashionista, because cerebral palsy makes you spastic. So it's kind of a tongue in cheek, it's a play on words. It's just a way to be cutesy and to be recognizable. I started the blog. I started to kind of put up posts about what it's like to be not only disabled, but at that time I was a plus size woman, even at 5 feet tall, petite, have all these different wardrobe challenges, and then also try and find things that fit me and the language that I was trying to express on that day, all within the confines of a budget. So it's all these different parameters, and then make it appealing to people. Make the fact that I want you to see me first and see the disability second, or maybe third, or maybe not at all. And that does happen eventually. People who've been around me say that they don't even notice it anymore. Once I had been doing that for, I think, 4 years, I started my nonprofit Fashion is for Everybody, and that's a whole separate entity that kind of evolved from the fashion blogging aspect.
This is such a fascinating story. Let's talk a little bit about some positive influence you've received from the Nashville fashion industry. How did that happen?
That happened because I networked and networked and networked. And for the most part, I was really welcomed with open arms into the Nashville fashion community. We have so many wonderful designers in this city, and we are the third largest fashion hub in the country at the moment. So we have all of this diversity and all of these talented people that are creating within a city that is really fertile for them. It's a good environment for them. I approached them as I was blogging, and then I attended Nashville Fashion Week as a media person, and I got to interact with them, and I eventually started to talk about how some of their clothes might look on me, what kind of adjustments we'd have to make to have them work for me. And I'm pretty proud to say that at this point, probably 80% of my wardrobe is Nashville fashion. It's pieces that have come from designers that live in this area. And it's not only a comment on the wonder of our community, it's a way to keep the income within our community. And it's also a great way to address the issue of sustainability. So it's something that I encourage people. I mean, I obviously encourage people from everywhere to buy Nashville designers, but I especially encourage people here to do that because it does so much for so many people, not the least of which is the person wearing the actual clothes because they're beautiful.
As we've talked a little bit about fashion and really how you discovered, I guess, the Nashville fashion industry, tell us a little bit about how you're helping transform some fashion shows. I've noticed some posts that you've done that relate to bringing other people, real people from all walks of life, and really bringing their unique gifts and challenges to the table. Can you paint a picture of what some of those events have looked like?
I can. That is actually the nonprofit that was started by myself and a friend of mine, Crystal Ramos, who used to own Pura Vida Vintage here in Nashville. We started a nonprofit called Fashion is for Everybody. And what we do is we challenge stereotypes and transform lives using fashion. Okay. We take adults of all ages, all sizes, and all physical abilities, and we throw once a year a big runway show, just like you would see at Nashville Fashion Week. The only difference being that we use these atypical models alongside standard models because they're people too. We don't want to exclude them. We want it to be fully inclusive. So we use designers that are local to the area, and they make their clothes to measure for each model that goes down that runway. And it's an event where we have food and drink and shopping. There's pop-up shopping from designers. There's a party afterwards. It's a big celebration, but more than anything, it's the point being driven home that inclusion is the way forward, that we really don't need to segregate runways unless it's purely for artistic purposes. And to me, that's fine. That has value. I don't want to say that those runways should not exist. I want to say that our runway should exist as well. We want people to understand their value and the value of the community they live in as far as what's available in fashion and how wearing these clothes and interacting with each other from all different walks of life can really change who they are as people.
While we're talking about fashion, let's talk a little bit about fashion advice. What advice would you give to others, especially since you strive so much, as we all should, to think about diversity and inclusivity?
The most important advice that I want to give anyone out there is it's okay to have the body that you have right now, even if you are not impressed with it. I don't think any of us are. Everybody has body issues. I have body issues. I'm not exempt from that. Work with what you have right this second. Think about the things you wear that make you happy. Think about the things you wear that say what you need them to say, where and when you need to say it. And that is the most important thing. It's easy to get to where you need to be on this fashion journey, whether you go through Goodwill or go through Rodeo Drive. It doesn't really matter. The important part is that you have value and you should be able to dress the way that you want to dress and express who you are.
That is so perfect, because I was just thinking as you were talking a little bit about some of your designer clothes because of your contacts, but also the fact that I've noticed that sometimes you have posted images of articles of clothing that you found at a thrift store or at Goodwill. And then you've also commented on the fact, not only did you seek input from others kind of in real time, but don't you sometimes believe that customizing a piece with a tailor and using resources like that gives you a unique look as well?
Yes, it does. And more than that, it's very important that everyone realize that there is no such thing as an off the rack body. It does not exist because we have such different variation in the standards of clothing sizes and shapes. There is no such thing as that. So a tailor is absolutely essential. And if you're smart, you'll have my tailor, who is Eric Adler, but you'll have to get in line behind me because I'm first.
He's a good one, that's for sure. And I know that you surround yourself with excellent resources. It seems to me that as we talk through some of these things, the Nashville community has become so close knit, but you've also become such a big piece of that picture, including the fact that you just signed with a talent agency. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, that was actually a very big and pleasant surprise for me. I was actually at a socially distant fashion show about a month ago with my friend Andrew Clancy, who is Any Old Iron, and Laura Citron, who has her own brand by the same name. Actually, Laura is just my absolute favorite designer in the whole world. I have probably 10 of her pieces, so I can't say enough good things, and I have quite a few of Andrew's as well. But I was at a fashion show and I ran into my friend Sherry, who owns Tribe Talent Management. And Tribe works with our show every year. They're a sponsor. They give us some of our models, not all, maybe about 30%. I sat with Sherry. We were all vaccinated, so we were all safe. And she said, I just need to sign you. And I said, are you sober? She said, yep, I'm sober. I need to sign you. I said, okay. I am Tribe's first, almost 60, because I'll be 60 in a couple of weeks, model with a visible disability with cerebral palsy. And I'm pretty green at this point, so we're still going through the getting headshots taken and getting things like that set up. But I'm actually really proud to be able to represent the different and diverse demographics that I do in doing this. I don't have any expectations beyond it's going to be great fun. And if something great happens, and that's wonderful. But I think that if you think back on the fact that 11 years ago, I was surrounded by a ruined house, and here I am now with a successful nonprofit, being able to advocate for people with disabilities in multiple areas and levels, including fashion and access and self acceptance, and then to have been able to sign as a professional model with the talent agency. That's not a bad decade's work, I don't think.
I'd say not. You're practicing what you preach, but you're actually modeling, no pun intended, exactly the behavior and the industry that you're in, which I think just further exemplifies how things, I think, in the fashion industry have even transpired. I look at catalogs and advertisements now, maybe when I get a catalog mailed to my home or see something online, they're now using images of models that look like real people. Have you noticed that transition too?
I have noticed that. And I think it's about time, because the point that I've always made to designers is if you only want to sell to people that are size 0, you're kind of limiting yourself. If you want to show clothes a collection on size zeros at Nashville Fashion Week, I think it's wonderful. I love Nashville Fashion Week. I am there every year. I support them, I cheer them on. I don't want anything I say or do to be ever taken as denigrating their mission and what they do, because it has value and purpose too. But yes, it's so wonderful to be able to see the real world depicted, companies are waking up to the fact that we are all consumers. And so the more of us that you can depict, the more successful you're going to be.
That's great. You've got a very good business mind as well, I can tell. Let me ask you about mentors. Do you have a mentor or someone who influenced you to become the community leader you are today?
Yes, and you're going to laugh when I tell you who it is. I started this whole thing because of David Bowie. Because, okay, this is so bizarre, okay? Obviously, as someone who is 60, I kind of grew up with David Bowie's music. But what I grew up with that really kind of impacted me was David Bowie was different, and he did not cower because of it. He embraced it, he celebrated it, he evolved into more and more different things and personas. He was a very smart businessman too, but more importantly, he kind of was the poster child for being different and embracing it. And so when he died in 2016, it really was a wake up call to me that I can't wait any longer to do this stuff, that tomorrow is not promised. And that's when we really leaned into making fashion is for everybody a reality and not just something that we talked about. So, yes, and people are constantly giving me either artwork or jewelry or some kind of memento that has to do with Bowie. So I now have this big wall in my house. It's nothing but David Bowie artwork. To be a person that does not relate to many other people can be a blessing and it can be a curse. And I think that I kind of saw that example of difference as a blessing. And so that was my role model. The other one, oddly enough, although there were many personal problems, was my mother. My mother was a model. She came here, she was born in Cuba. She came here, she did modeling in Cuba. She modeled for Saks Fifth Avenue when we first moved to New York. She used to make us matching outfits, although she was always really critical of my body. Her sense of self, although kind of sad in some ways, gave me the courage to just kind of get out there and do it because what do I have to lose? The only thing I have to lose is nothing will happen. These are kind of my two. One's offhanded and the other's weird. So I don't have any straightforward answers for life.
Those are fabulous answers. And the minute you said David Bowie, I just immediately wanted to know, have you ever walked the runway to a Bowie song? And if so, what was it?
Yes, it was the very first runway I ever did in my entire life. It was Moon Age Daydream, and I was wearing one of Laura Citron's kimonos. In fact, it was her very first kimono. It was the first show we did, and I was terrified. And I got to the end of the runway, and I spread my arms out to show the kimono, and everybody just gasped. And I thought, okay, I think I've got this now. I think I can do this.
That's just wonderful. So I'm also curious about how it feels to be one of the first in this field of fashion. Is that what you would consider a success? And if not, what do you consider your next success or goal?
I think it is a success. I think that we have a long way to go. I think that we're getting there. It's going to take probably the rest of my lifetime doing this. My other goal, I think, as I look around, especially this year, with not only what COVID has done, but with our awakening that we are being unjust to so many people. I'm seeing a wake up to treating people equally, treating them better for everyone except people with disabilities. They are conveniently forgotten. As our town grows exponentially, many times barriers to access that should not exist because these are new buildings and new construction. Accessibility is not, although it is supposed to be illegal, inaccessibility is still the catchphrase of progress in this town. And that's just not acceptable. So I think that what I want and the reason that we do what we do as inclusive is I want you and me and a person of color and a person of a different sexual orientation and so on, to be able to sit down, have lunch, and like each other and understand each other. We don't have to live somebody else's life, but we do want to understand and make them feel included. And I think that's a big thing for me is I want people to feel included. That goes for being able to put your clothes on and off. So this year, for the first time ever, we are requiring and I am helping co-design adaptive clothing, which is clothing that people with disabilities and or older people with manual dexterity issues can put on and off by themselves, which is major. It's huge. It's not something that you see done inclusively anywhere to my knowledge. So I like to do a lot of things first. I don't necessarily need to be only, but I want to be the first. I want to say, here's the example. Take this example and do something with it.
I love it. And I think we all should follow in those footsteps. That just not only gave me goosebumps, but it also resonated not only because of the audience that we are working to serve through 50 Forward, being the older adults. And I can even give examples in my personal life of where, when my father had a fall and had a traumatic brain injury, I kept saying, why are there not things that are easier for him to deal with so he doesn't have to rely on all of us, between zippers and snaps and pockets. And you have so many aha moments when you watch somebody try to button their shirt. The list is endless, and I can hear you and I see you and I applaud you. That's just good for all of us, the efforts that you're putting toward the inclusivity and adaptivity, I think, of all these things that will make accessibility and level the playing field for everyone.
An accessible garment does not limit an able bodied person or someone who is younger. It only frees up people who are maybe older with arthritis or disabled. I'm not hurting anybody by doing this. I am not detracting from the aesthetic of a garment. So I think accessibility in clothing should be our new universal aspiration.
That's perfect. I love it. We ask one question of all of our guests, and it's been so interesting to hear the response. It relates to an older adult or parents and a piece of information that they might have shared with you that at the time when you were younger, you might have thought was silly, but now that phrase rings true in your everyday life. What piece of advice would you say that someone shared with you like that?
It wasn't necessarily a piece of advice that was verbal, it was an example that was set. And the example was actually my mother. I mentioned that she came here, she and my father both came here from Cuba, and they were escaping Castro. He was French and she was Cuban, and they came to New York with $10 literally in their pocket. Okay. They had to reinvent themselves often. They had to kind of build something from nothing. I think that watching that example, watching my mother in particular, who was an incredibly talented person and had a very sad life. My dad committed suicide when I was 14. She was left kind of having to support myself and my younger brother. She had to go back to school. She had to work. She did all these things and she really killed it. It kind of cost her her sanity, not literally, but it made her tired. And I think the thing that I have learned from her is to take the positive aspect of building something and try not to let it suck your soul, try to let it feed your soul. So that's what I try and do. And honestly, I could not do any of this without the support of able bodied people around me, especially my better half, as I call him, Clint, because he can be my better half, trust me. We've been together for a very long time and he believes in me. So I think for me, example, actions and not words are the advice that I take forward. I observe and then I adjust accordingly.
So you've given us many examples of things that you do to maybe turn a negative circumstance into a positive. I'm curious, in response to our closing question, what is it that you do to squeeze the day?
Everything I can. At the end of the day, I do want for your listeners to understand that I do have physical limitations. I find it difficult to type. I have very bad manual dexterity issues. My sense of balance is really terrible. It does get a little better if I have a whiskey, but that's really not something I do more than once every other month because, that's just not smart. For me, I try and take every day and work on myself first because an empty vessel cannot nourish anyone. I work on myself and then I try and see what I can do to make the world a better place. And or if I really get stressed out, I have to shop for shoes on the internet because that's my thing. I don't have to buy them. I just have to look at them. I just want to look at them. 10 minutes of that and I can come back to the problem and do okay.
So now we know what motivates you, shoes. That's awesome. Thank you for joining us today. What an amazing life of leadership we're witnessing from interviews and stories such as yours. You've given us example after example of turning lemons to lemonade and squeezing the day. We're greatly appreciative.
It's my honor.
Now we challenge everyone listening to go squeeze the day.